So today we're taking a look at the Montana, and specifically this game where I'm not exactly sure how I lived through this whole match, but we're going to push very aggressively in the Montana. Monty is probably worse than Ohio overall. I don't think that's a very controversial thing to say. However, having 12 guns does have its benefits, especially against broadsides. Pretty nice start, although it would have been very nice to kill this Minotaur here rather than let him get away on low HP. But pushing in as a Montana, the things you have to really consider is angling. That's a really important thing here. Since this ship is reasonably big, but more importantly, this ship has one of the worst rudder shifts in the entire game. It's something like 22, 23 seconds. So dealing with torpedoes, trying to angle and dodge shells, you have to be thinking about that well in advance. This is not a ship that you can just hit your rudder and you're going to dodge things very quickly. Like some of the battle cruisers, or even just more modern battleships that have been added to the game more recently, it seems like wargaming is settled around a 15 to 18 second rudder shift is good for tier 10 battleships. Montana's old though. It's from a different era of the game, so we have to keep that in mind. It's actually not very maneuverable at all. But it is tanky. It's very, very tanky. And the thing we have to consider here is when do we push up? When do we decide to make a play? And it's early. It's probably too early to make a play. But on this specific map, we have a bunch of tiny little islands that we can use to limit who's shooting at us. This is something I talk about all the time in brawling battleships. This is typically when I'm playing in Ohio or something with secondaries like a GK or Poison, something like that. Monty doesn't have secondaries, but it still can play this role, and it actually plays this brawling role really well. Montana guns are terrifying at close range, so as we're able to push up, we're actually going to be pushing the enemy team away. And it's not just cruisers and battleships that you can do good damage to. Even into DDs, you're going to see some decent damage, assuming we get reasonable dispersion. And most of the time these days especially, secondaries aren't going to be your primary source of damage for those brawling secondary battleships, unless maybe you're a Schlieffen, but even then, a lot of the damage is still coming from main guns anyway. So with Montana, instead of that Ohio heal where we have a 40-second cooldown, we have a normal cooldown. It's 80 seconds, a very long time to wait for the heals. They heal much more HP back, so that's where their improvement is, right? Nearly 24,000 HP is coming back every heal, and we get 5 of them, which is really nice. We can pop our spotter plane to try and spot this Monty. I was hoping I'd catch him coming out broadside here. But take note of how I'm constantly speeding up and slowing down here. I'm trying to juke the torpedoes that I know are coming. There's a Shimakaze, there's an Elbing. We know the torpedoes are going to be on the way, so we have to try and not eat those as much as possible. We're flat broadside to them all. And really what I need to do is, as I'm pushing up here, unfortunate we didn't get any citadels there given the Monty was at that angle. And you can actually cheek Montanas a little bit. We just didn't get the dispersion required. There's Elbing, in fact, just like that. Trying to pick timings. I'm trying to go full speed for a bit and then slow down to try and juke the torpedoes as much as possible. Minotaur raining shells in from above, of course. And I'm swapping over to the HE. In fact, here, I would have done more damage with armor piercing into the Shimakaze. I really do wonder sometimes what the point of high explosive into some of these DDs is, since, well, we're going to hit 4 here. And we did 4,700, which is pretty good. But considering 4 overpens would have done over 5,000 damage, I don't know, it's a small difference. It's just sad that switching to HE like that doesn't actually benefit me all that much. Specifically in this case, if you're wondering why, it's because we're hitting modules on top of the ship that's taking up some of the damage, which is unfortunate, where armor piercing doesn't do that. And then because of that, we have HE loaded when the Monty does come out flat broadside. It's one of the reasons I actually tend to just spam AP out of most of my battleships, unless I can guarantee a lot of salvos into the hull armor of these destroyers. That's only at really, really close ranges. Unfortunately, Monty also takes out one of our turrets, and he angles in time, so we're actually not able to do all that much damage. But we're pushing again. This seems suicidal. We're getting close to 2 million potential damage, but the point of this push here is I can't stay in that smoke where I was. I can't stay next to that tiny little island. The Vermonts are actually starting to look at me as I'm pushing towards the enemy spawn. Sticking with HE here, since Monty ate a torpedo, we want to get those permanent fires. And yet we miss at this range. Dispersion is always a good time. But this island in front of us, this is the key here. This island is very, very strong. And this is where we're going to spend the rest of our game, actually. Limiting the number of people that can shoot at us. It is possible to push in as a battleship. But what I want you to notice, and you probably already have, there's no carrier here. If you're sitting on these islands like this, you're just a sitting duck to carriers, and that's why you don't push in a carrier game. It's great for limiting the fire of any of the surface ships, even submarines to a certain extent. You can limit their firing angles as well, but a carrier, this is just suicide. So you do have to get the right matchmaker to actually push in and have it be successful, but hey, 100,000 damage, we've fully controlled the sea cap now at this point. We just need our team to hopefully just come in and fill in the gaps, hopefully get some spotting. But you can see how we're not actually going to be shot at by any of the enemy ships that are towards the B cap. It's really on this Minotaur for now. And these kind of plays are really what I miss doing in battleships. I really enjoy this pushing in, creating a crossfire, controlling an area just by sheer presence alone. And this isn't something that really works most of the time. This partially worked because of the map, partially because of the matchmaker, but also we just didn't get shot at too much from the people in middle until we were almost at our safe island. What I really wish would happen is we got some different map design that actually allowed for some of these pushes to come through. I think that would involve actually having bigger islands, ones that are intended to split up teams, to allow for maybe zones or areas of the map that people can just push through without actually having to deal with crossfires. The middle of Two Brothers is a decent example of that. As you can see, backing out here for just a second, they really want me dead. And you know, fair enough. If they decide to push through to B or even to C, well, I'm going to have free crossfires on them. They do have to deal with me eventually. So I'm just content hanging out here. Patience is definitely key here. Although, by the looks of things, our team is actually doing pretty well to control the middle of the map. We're nice bait all the way out here on the corner. But 3.2 million potential already. Definitely going to get a little bit higher as the Vermont slowly makes its way over to deal with us. It's so fun playing on these flanks, trying to have these more interesting engagements, more unique experiences than just sniping over the caps and just sniping from one spawn to the other in open water. That's why I love the Two Brothers map, even though there can be some absolutely atrocious, no fun games on Two Brothers. There's also the possibility for some of the most fun games that I've ever had are on maps like Two Brothers. Okay, Minotaur finally broadside again. This time, hopefully we can deal with him, right? He's been peppering us for an extremely long time. And yes, we do. We finally do take him out. Notice I'm not getting greedy for my rear turrets. This is something that it takes a lot of discipline, and I don't always have that discipline, but not using your back turrets makes you much tankier. And that's something that I don't really want to do in a Montana, because then I'm basically in Iowa, tier lower. And, I mean, the Vermont just absolutely crushed us anyway. But that's RNG. That's just a lucky salvo. He's not going to get that every single time. Sometimes, as that pushing tank, brawler, holding battleship, you have to sacrifice some of your damage output just to stay alive. This is something that I've learned over playing competitive, actually. Sometimes, as a battleship, I was just there to sit and tank. Sometimes, in those comp games, you would see me just sitting in a cap zone, not really even able to shoot at anything because maybe something wasn't even spotted at, and I was getting farmed out. But I was there to delay, and that is sometimes all that's required to win the game. You don't even need to do damage. Although we have done a nice amount of damage, 150k. Look at that, we just ticked over 4 million potential damage. Certainly not something that happens very often anymore, as damage has stacked more accurately and much better at longer ranges. Now, though, that one of the Vermonts, at least, has been dealt with, we've seen the Elbing Torps, I'm okay with pushing out here. And now that we can get moving again, we're actually going to be a lot harder to hit for that enemy Vermont. It's harder to aim directly at that superstructure. And very crucially here, I'm not going to shoot. Sometimes it's better to just not shoot, because the Zhao then would be able to use all of its guns at me. You can see the points are actually able to tick out to 900 here, so it's not really going to change anything. But sometimes in these brawls as a battleship, you need to hold your shot until the enemy presents their broadside. They're going to go for torps. They're going to try and do something. Maybe they're going to try and turn out just entirely and try and get kiting again. But they're going to do something. And when that happens, that's when you blap them. Or they get close enough that you just overmatch through their bow into their citadel, and that's also super consistent. Of course, it always depends on the situation, though. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Other times, you should just be using your full DPM. Also, what we want to use is HE sometimes in those closer range situations. I know I said I typically don't use it against DDs unless they're really close. Well, Gunfeeder is always going to help with that. And sometimes HE is even the right play to make into battleships or even cruisers that you're not overmatching, or maybe you know they've used their damage control. There's always a situation for different ammo types. Notice I'm actually using Vigilance here, a really helpful tool if you're wanting to push in. It also boosts your torpedo protection quite a lot as well. But that is the commander. Otherwise, it looks pretty standard. Brawling like this, pushing in, oh, it's just my favorite. I wish I could do it more. And actually, I had a couple of games today where I kind of had a decent job pushing in and doing some good damage, although this Montana game was certainly the best out of those, and that is why I'm showing it to you. The rest of the build looked a little bit like this. Notice we're actually not even using the legendary mod. Unfortunately, they nerfed this one. This happened a long time ago, so don't think this is like a recent nerf, but this used to, I believe, give you another 30% fire and flood recovery time. Or maybe it was 15 or 20? I don't know. Whatever it was more than 10% before, and it actually gave you fires that lasted less than 30 seconds on your ship. No longer can you do that with the full anti-fire build, but it's still a reasonably strong upgrade, mainly for the rudder shift. Like I mentioned, yeah, 22.2 seconds. Pretty nasty stuff, at least when stock. But concealment's just so good. Not only do you get 10% detectability range, giving you that surprise salvo that maybe you dev strike a Minotaur with. You also gain that 5% dispersion of shells against your ship, so enemies are less accurate. That's always a nice thing, especially if you're bow in and they're just trying to hit your superstructure. That's a way to tank for a long period of time. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I certainly had a lot of fun playing this one. Definitely an intense match in the Montana, and nearly 4.5 million potential damage. I don't always see that anymore. Certainly, as I'm forced to play a little more passive these days, it's not going to happen every game. But a lot of fun when it does. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.